This next video is about mechanisms and catalysts. It's the fourth video in the Kinetics series. So, reactions on the molecular level occur in several steps. So, to determine the rate law for a mechanism, you must look at the steps in which the reaction takes place. They are called elementary steps, and they must satisfy two requirements. The sum of the elementary steps must equal the overall balanced equation, and the mechanism must agree with the experimentally determined rate law. The rate law is determined by the sum of the rate laws of all the steps through the slow step. The slow step is going to be the one that determines how fast the reaction can go, and therefore it determines the orders of the reactants. So reactants can be qualified as based on their molecularity. So the sequence of bonding, making, and breaking occurs in a couple of places. So you can have unimolecular reactions where one compound just becomes products. You have bimolecular where either two of the same things form one products, or two different things react and form the products. Or you have termolecular reactions, which are very rare, and they come together. Three things come together to form the products. And each of those have represented rate laws. So a unimolecular is a first order. A bimolecular, either the one reactant is a second order, or the two reactants are both first orders individually. And each of those elementary steps, their orders come together in the mechanism. So what does the mechanism tell you? Well, if you look at the potential energy diagram, it tells you basically where the slow step is. So this is a potential energy diagram of a two-step mechanism. And if you look at the two-step mechanism, because the first transition state has the highest activation energy, that tells you that's the slow step. And so that's going to be the rate determining step, and that's going to control the speed of the reaction. So we can't make this reaction go any faster by changing the concentrations of what's involved in the second step, because it's after the rate determining step. So here's a reaction, and it tells us that the order of this, based on the rate law, is NO2 is a second order reactant. So the question is, why is carbon monoxide a zero order reactant having no effect on the rate? Well, it's in the mechanism. So let's look at the mechanism and see why. If you look at the mechanism, we can write rate laws for each of the individual things in the mechanism, and they'll actually explain a little bit why carbon monoxide is a zero order reactant. So for the first step, we can write the rate law for this reaction. So what's the rate law? Rate is equal to K times NO2 squared. Why? Because this is a bimolecular reaction, and so it takes the two NO2s reacting with each other to form NO3 and a nitrogen monoxide. Then what does that NO3 do? That NO3 is made and then immediately used, which means it's an intermediate. So we're going to cancel those out. For the second one, we call it a unimolecular because it's just the carbon monoxide. So the rate is equal to K times the carbon monoxide to the 1, because there's only one carbon monoxide in this step. And that's a unimolecular reaction. So there's the rate law for that step in the series. And if you look, here's the overall reaction. Now, why don't I have a 2 in front of here? Well, look, I made another NO2, which cancels out one of the NO2s that I originally used. So that leaves me with one NO2 actually used. All right. And remember that NO3 was an intermediate. So what are the possibilities? We actually have 2 possible rate laws, and it depends on which one is the slow step. If the first one is the slow step, then only this part of the reaction controls the speed of the reaction, and that would be the rate law. If the second one is the slow step, then it would include the carbon monoxide. So we have 2 possible rate laws. It could be rate is equal to K times NO2 to the 2, or it could be rate equals K times NO2 to the 2 and CO to the 1. Those are our 2 possible rate laws based on this mechanism. So which one is the right one? It depends on which one is the slow step. If the first one is the slow step, then this is the rate law. If the second one is the slow step, then this is the rate law. So we're going to need to have some information to tell us which one's the slow step. Well, there we go. The first one is the slow step. And since the first one is the slow step, then this dictates the rate law. And we know the rate law is based on the slow step. So the rate is equal to K times NO2 squared. Adding CO2 can't change the rate. Why? Because it's after the slow step, the rate determining step. So adding CO2 isn't going to make this reaction go any faster because it's past the rate determining step. So what kind of questions are you going to see on mechanisms? They're either going to give you a rate law and give you a series of mechanisms and ask you to pick which one is the correct mechanism, or they're going to give you a mechanism and say, is this mechanism correct? Does it match the rate law? Okay. My hint to you is to draw a line after the slow step in the mechanism and add up the number of reactants in each step before and including the slow step, and see does the number match their order. Watch out for intermediates and catalysts. They should cancel out. All right, so let's look at a practice problem. So we have nitrogen dioxide and fluorine reacting, okay? And they're giving us an experimentally determined rate law. So there's our rate law. So we know nitrogen dioxide is a first order and fluorine is also a first order. And they're going to give us a suggested mechanism. So let's look at our suggested mechanism. The first step is the slow step, so draw a line. And what's the rate law for this step? Include your reactants, and the orders become the number of them. So we have NO2 to the 1 and F2 to the 1. All right. Is this an acceptable mechanism? Does this step, being the slow step, does that dictate a rate law that matches the given rate law? So does this rate law match based on the fact that this is a slow step? And the answer is yes. Does it match the 2 requirements? Does it have the rate law? Okay? And does it dictate what it's supposed to dictate? Do the sum of the elementary steps equal the overall balanced equation? Well, do we have our F's cancel out, which means they're intermediates? We end up with 2 NO2s and an F2. And they are going to give us 2 NO2Fs. And that matches this. Does the mechanism agree with experimentally determined rate law? Yep. Okay. So is this an acceptable mechanism? Yes, it's an acceptable mechanism because it matches the overall reaction, it matches the rate law, and it's correct based on the fact that this is the slow step. What if the second one was the slow step? If this were the slow step, then how would that change things? If this were the slow step, what would the rate law be? We would include the first step, so that would be rate equals K times NO2 squared F2 to the 1, making the NO2 a second order reactant. And if they said that were the slow step, it would not match the experimentally determined rate law, which means it would not be the correct one. So, your mechanisms, make sure they match the experimentally determined rate laws. Use the slow step to help you and include the slow step. All right, last thing in kinetics is catalysts, making effective collisions. So you just have to know about catalysts, what kind of catalysts there are, and what do catalysts do. Catalysts help you speed up reactions by lowering their activation energy. So they'll increase the rate of a chemical reaction by lowering this activation energy. Catalysts are not consumed, okay? They lower the activation energy of an elementary step in the mechanism and speed up the reaction so you can get to equilibrium faster or get to completion faster. How do they do this? They provide effective collisions with the correct orientation. So we don't need as many collisions because they make sure that your collisions are effective. All right. Types of catalysts. So a lot of times they'll ask you about homogeneous versus heterogeneous catalysts. That's about states of matter. Homogeneous means the catalysts are the same state of matter as the reactants. Heterogeneous means they're different. Acid-based catalysts, well, they're acids or they're bases. Surface catalysts, when they're talking about surface catalysts, they're talking about using the surface of something to catalyze a reaction. An example is hydrocarbon cracking. And then one of the biggest catalysts that we deal with, especially in biology, are enzymes. Enzymes rule biology and they get reactions to happen that wouldn't normally happen. So all kinds of biological catalysts happen out there. Okay, catalysts in nature. A perfect example they use all the time is chlorofluorocarbons breaking down ozone. So here's an example of a catalyst in a reaction. So in the ozone layer, we can see the chlorofluorocarbons breaking down the ozone layer. You can see it going up there. So what is happening? We've got the catalyst going into the reaction and then it's coming back out of the reaction unchanged. So if you look at the reaction, we can see, let me change the colors. We can see this goes into the reaction. reacts with the ozone, makes this intermediate, which is then immediately used, and then as a result produces this back. The chlorine atom is the catalyst. Okay? Why? Because it just gets produced and can be used again. It went into the reaction, it came back unchanged. All right? So that's what you're going to look for when you see a catalyst. Catalyst goes into the reaction, comes back out unchanged. So that's the end of our kinetics videos. I hope they've been helpful. Good luck with kinetics. It's really about, can you do the rate laws? Can you use your graphs? Can you do the math for the rate law calculations? Good luck on your AP exam.